It is so good to be back, and it is so inspiring to see all the work that you have done and how the conversation has evolved and matured in that time. So thank you so much for all your good work. Now, I know that keynote speakers are always supposed to stand up and say, thank you for all your good work, but I want to tell you, I really, really mean it. I mean, it is the most sincere thank you I can possibly think of. In addition to the benefits to California's environment and public health and economy and the global climate, your work has made my work a lot easier. I'm really appreciative. Because of you, I have been able to convince people that there are alternatives to the take-make-waste system. You have showed the entire world what is possible. I'm sure you hear all the time about how the whole country is looking to California for leadership on these issues, and that is totally true. But it is not just the US, it is literally the entire world. I want to tell you just a quick story. This summer, I had the opportunity to go to Brunei. If you were like me, the first thing you would say, what? Where is that? It is a tiny country on the island of Borneo. They have 450,000 people. Their waste is 80% organic. Can I just pause for a moment and say how great it is to be with a community that is the interesting thing about a country? Like, I told a lot of people about my trip, but nobody else did I tell. The waste is 80% organic. It's 80% organic. People are really well educated, and education is centrally controlled. So one decision and you can inject new information in the curriculum. There is absolutely no waste management, no waste system at all right now. But it's a wealthy country. It's a very, very wealthy country. They have resources to spend. They have high levels of national pride, and they want to do the good thing. There's also a sultan. The sultan can announce one new system, and literally people start doing it overnight. Now, for the record, I'm all for democracy as opposed to sultan dictatorship, but if you do happen to be a sultan, you might as well tell people to compost. So I cannot imagine a country where implementing zero waste could be more straightforward. I was a speaker at their National Environmental Conference, and I made a case that Brunei should become a zero waste model. Now, before I went to Brunei, I did a little research, and I found out that they're considering a mass burn garbage incineration. Okay, you got 450,000 well-educated people and a bunch of banana peels, and you're considering an incinerator? Like, it is just absolutely nuts. And so I decided I'm gonna try and do something about that while I'm there. So at this reception, the Minister of Development was there. I was like, here is my chance. I went up, I buddied up to him. Turns out he'd been to California, he'd been to San Francisco, he loves the Golden Gate Bridge, he loved Pier 39. He really feels a connection with San Francisco. I was like, excellent, we're gonna leverage that. So we started having this conversation about waste, and I was telling him how there's all these solutions available. He was so skeptical. I mean, you should have seen the look on his face was like the look of California municipal officials in 1990 when you guys started talking about this stuff. He was like, yeah, right. So he invited me to go tour rubbish bins and their one transfer station that was smaller than this stage. I mean, we toured all around. We looked at the plastic bag choked rivers. The whole time I'm explaining all these other alternatives, the whole time he was looking at me so skeptically. And then I said, all over California, municipalities are adopting zero waste goals. He looked a little more open-minded, and then I said, San Francisco has exceeded 75% diversion, and his entire resistance melted away, and he looked at me and said, tell me what to do. So I was so appreciative. Now, when you travel internationally, that happens all the time. So the work that you guys are doing here is going to prevent an incinerator in Brunei, and it's going to get them on the road to zero waste, as it has so many other places. So thank you so much for making my route sound a lot more credible when I go out in the world and say that there are alternatives. Now, I love being here to learn about the most cutting edge and new thinking about zero waste, but I also love being here to see so many old friends that I haven't seen in so long, and to meet so many new friends. As I look out over the room, I see folks I haven't seen for 5 or 10 years, and I see a lot more people that I haven't yet met. Since I don't know so many of you, I wanted to give a little bit of background about my work so that you understand the perspectives that went into Story of Stuff, and you understand the sort of background perspectives that go into the comments that I want to share with you today. So I have been interested in materials issues since I was a kid. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest in Seattle, a very environmentally aware town, a very environmentally aware family. We used to do a lot of camping. Every summer, my family would load all our stuff in the family station wagon and drive out to the North Cascades. And since this was before the days of DVD players in cars, we used to actually look out the window and talk to each other. When we looked out the window, we would see an increasing number of clear cuts. And as a kid, driving past those clear cuts, I just sensed that something was wrong. It felt in my gut like a scene of violence. I didn't know about carbon sequestration or moderation of the hydrological cycle or all the reasons that we actually need forests to live. I just felt like something was wrong. So I decided I'm gonna figure it out. I'm gonna grow up and be a forest activist. I ended up going to college in New York City, which is an odd place to go to be a forest activist. But it turned out to be very fortuitous because that's where I found the second piece of the puzzle. My college was on Upper Broadway, my dorm was on 110th Street, and my campus was on 116th Street. And every morning I would walk those 6 blocks and there would be shoulder-high piles of garbage bags the entire way. Now, I'm from Seattle. We do not have garbage bags all over the street. I was like, what is all that stuff? That's where I picked up my habit that I'll bet people in this room share of looking in garbage wherever I go. Because that is how you can find out what's going on in society. It's like reading a society's secret journal is looking in the garbage. So, you know, I tell you, there's a reason to make those garbage bags black, because they don't want you looking at so you got to open them up and stick your head in, which I did constantly. And what I was so amazed to see is that it was almost all paper. And as you know, paper is still a significant portion of our waste stream, even where recycling has been a household word for generations. I feel like they could not make it easier for us to recycle paper unless somebody's got stationed in our kitchens. Like, it is so darn easy. So there's so much paper in there. I said, wait a minute, this is where my beloved Northwest forests are going, is it to pizza boxes and office paper? And then when I come home from school, it was gone, so I was like, well, where's it going next? So I took a field trip to the Fresh Kills landfill. How many people have been here? A lot. It was fascinating. So I stood there as a sophomore in college and I looked out, and I mean, actually I didn't even have to describe to you what I saw. You guys know what I saw. It's like as far as I could see in every direction was waste, and there was appliances and food and shoes and furniture and books. I couldn't believe books in the dump. I was absolutely stunned. Now, I had been raised in a family where you don't waste, not because we are bumping up against ecological limits and changing the climate, but because losers waste. Like, why would you waste? That's such a dumb thing to do. So I was absolutely stunned that we had built an entire economy on this level of wasting, and that it had been kept so hidden. How could I have gone all the way to being a sophomore in college until I found out about this? So right then and there, I said, I am going to figure this out, and I'm going to tell the world what I learned. After that was undergraduate, I went to graduate school in urban planning. Then I went down to Washington, D.C. to work for an environmental group. This was the late 80s, and it was right when concern about waste was exploding because garbage was washing up on the beach in New Jersey. There were hundreds of new garbage incinerator proposals. We had this idea that we would make it as hard as possible to burn or bury waste, make it politically unpopular, expensive, strictly regulated. And the idea was to put the pressure upstream to stop making so much waste in the first place. And there was a vibrant grassroots movement all around the country of communities fighting new disposal facilities. And there was a lot of success, curbside recycling, and there was a lot of public opposition to getting rid of waste by burning it and burying it. But there was one unforeseen consequence that we had not expected, which is that some schmucks started putting waste, I'm not talking about waste paper, I'm talking about all kinds of mixed garbage, very hazardous waste, on ships and sending it to third world countries to dispose of it. Now, at the environmental organization where I worked, we were still in our 20s and we hadn't had our sense of possibility socialized out of us yet. So we decided that we would get a global ban on the export of waste, of hazardous waste from rich countries to poor countries. And there were about 20 of us in this team. We were spread all over the world. Some people were in Geneva and Brussels and New York lobbying. My job, and get this was a great job, my job was to go find out where our waste was going and document it. So I spent over a decade traveling around the world, sneaking into factories to track our waste in China, in Indonesia, and Haiti, and South Africa. It was absolutely a fascinating decade. And that is really where I learned a lot of the stuff that went into the story of stuff. People often ask me, how long did it take you to make that film? I said 20 years. It took 20 years of thinking about these issues to figure out how to distill it. So after about a decade doing that, I had then connected with people all over the world really interested in waste. And so I left the organization that I was working with, and with a number of friends, we formed a global alliance working on these waste issues, Gaia, the Global Alliance for Incinerator Alternatives, which just had its 10th birthday, includes people in 91 countries. It was at Gaia that I came up with the presentation for the story of stuff and started sharing it around the country and the world. After the Story of Stuff exploded, I stopped traveling so much internationally and just really focused on the US because I realized that this country is, we need to make change the greatest and that the moment is so ripe for change. So over the last 5 years since launching the Story of Stuff, I have traveled coast to coast. I have gone to cities that I didn't even know existed to talk with people, to attend conferences, and to work with people who weren't actually working on waste, who oddly enough didn't even think waste was that interesting. It's been a fascinating experience. In a way, I feel like I'm like a waste head like all of you, and I went undercover into the real world and found out what people are talking about, and I've come back and I want to share what I've learned. I want to share 3 insights that I have learned, 3 insights that have made my work stronger and that I believe can make our entire zero waste movement stronger. So my 3 key realizations that I want to change, that I think we can implement to change to make our work better. The first realization is that people do not understand what we are talking about. People do not understand us. Now, I hate to sound like my teenage daughter, but people really don't understand us. The people in this room are the world's experts on zero waste. You guys know more about it than anyone. And I have learned that sometimes with increasing expertise comes a decreasing ability to communicate about these issues. So let me tell you how I learned this. A number of years ago, I did this fabulous leadership training program that I recommend to all of you. It's called the Rockwood Leadership Training Program. It is an excellent program for anybody who wants to make change in the world. It happens to be based in the Bay Area, but they have trainings all over the country, so write that down. Rockwood Leadership Training Program. It's great. I did this Rockwood Leadership Training Program. They have a 3-day one and then they have a year-long one. In the year-long one, there are 20 very, very experienced activists on all kinds of issues. Some on environment, some on anti-poverty, some on building democracy, some on fighting racism, like very, very diverse issues. There's 20 of us, and we meet 4 times over the course of the year. Now, one of the exercises that they did early on was they had you stand up in front of the group, inviting authentic feedback afterwards, and talk about what your mission and what your purpose is in life. So I thought, this is great. I am going to recruit all of these people to work on waste because it's the most interesting thing in the world. And what they are doing is connected anyway, so why not just work on waste? So I stood up there super confident because I had read every book on waste. I had been to hundreds of factories and dumps. I knew so much about waste. I stood up there and gave the most intellectually advanced, most impressive vocabulary-laden talk I could possibly give about waste. I talked about zero waste and endocrine-disrupting chemicals and supply chains and products of incomplete combustion. I explained that my mission was to create a paradigm shift in our relationship to materials. So when I was done, I was very satisfied with myself. I stood up there. And this guy who was the director of Move On, like he was a smart guy, he raised his hand and he said, I have no idea what you just said. And there was this hand thing you do if you agree, so not everyone else said, the entire room did this. And I was totally shocked. I was like, what is there not to understand? We are using too much materials, we are using too toxic materials. And the Move On guy said, I work on democracy, that has nothing to do with materials. I said, are you kidding? Democracy has everything to do with materials. Who do you think is making the rules about the materials we use? He said, what are you talking about? He said, what is a material? And he was sitting in a chair, he was holding a notebook. And I said, it's everything, it's what you're holding, it's what you're sitting on. And in this moment of incredible revelation for me, he looked down, and he looked back up and he said, no, Annie, I'm sitting on a chair. And I said, oh, is that what your brains do when you see that thing, is you say chair? And they said, And they said, what does yours do? And I said, mine is like, you know, it looks like teak. I wonder if it's from Malaysia or Indonesia. I wonder if the Sudan people got displaced from that. It looks like it's bleaching phthalates. It wasn't designed for the environment. There's no screws. When that PVC rips, it's going to have to be tossed. I wonder what company made that. That's what my brain does. And they told me, they said, Annie, you need to get out a little more. So they gave me some very useful feedback that changed my way of presenting this information, and it changed my life, and I want to share this feedback with you. So number one, they said that I was starting the conversation 20 years into it. They said, surprisingly, they hadn't spent the previous 20 years going to factories and dumps around the world. They told me to start at the beginning of the conversation. It reminded me of that famous statement by Saul Alinsky, community organizer extraordinaire. He said, talk to people where they're at, not where you're at. They told me that my technical jargon served to exclude them, rather than impress them. I thought if I really show them how smart I am, they'll say, wow, she's real smart, I want to work with her. Instead, what they said is that it made them feel dumb, it made them feel disempowered. They would have to pause on these words they didn't know, and since I was speaking so fast, I was already like 3 sentences later by the time they rejoined the conversation. So they told me to simplify. Van Jones, who I think many of you know, he said, I never want to hear you say paradigm shift in relationship to materials in public ever again. He said, or everybody said, that I didn't make connections to the issues that they cared about, that there were no doors for them to enter the conversation through. Now, I thought, my God, that's so interesting, because I thought we're working on the same thing. Like, you work on climate? So do I. Zero waste helps the climate. You work on poverty? So do I. Zero waste tends to solve some of the environmental justice problems that disproportionately impact poor communities. You know, whatever it is that they work on, I was like, yeah, we work on that too. But they didn't assume those same connections. They also told me that I was in my head the whole time, that I was all full of facts and data and graphs, and they told me to lower my center of gravity to my heart, and to be human, and to take the time to connect with people. They challenged me to figure out a way to talk about these issues that's accessible and relevant and welcoming and maybe even fun. So the group met 3 more times over the course of the year, and each time we all tried really different things. And each time I got a little bit better, but on the 3rd time they said, Annie, you are never going to be able to talk about this in a way that regular people want to listen. So on the final of the 4 sessions, this was like my Hail Mary attempt. I'm like, all right, last chance. They kept saying start at the beginning. I put this giant piece of butcher board up. I drew an earth. I'm like, let's start at the beginning. And I just, off the top of my head, did the story of stuff. And I was a little bit joking, and they loved it. And they said, that is how you've got to talk about these issues. And that is the story of stuff. That is how the story of stuff was born. Now, but I want to pass on that challenge that they gave me to our entire zero waste community. CRRA members have done an amazing job popularizing the term zero waste in the recycling community, made inroads into the business community and schools. What we need to do is turn the volume up on zero waste massively, locally, nationally, and internationally. We've got to protect the concept from those who want to hijack and dilute it. We need to experiment with talking about zero waste in a way that is accessible and inviting and relevant, and which connects to issues that people already care about. Rather than nagging people to care about what we care about, let's frame what we care about in the frame of the issues that they already care about, because there are so many connections. And we need to take risks and give each other authentic feedback. In my 20 years of talking about waste, the only feedback anyone had ever given me is that I talk too fast. No one told me that it was incomprehensible and uninspiring. That was some really important feedback. So I'd like to suggest that in your offices, practice innovative ways of talking about these issues and invite authentic feedback. We have got to get more creative and more inventive in how we talk about zero waste. So that is my first lesson, is that we got to get better at talking about this stuff. My second thing that I learned, and that I'd like to offer to all of you, is that what got us here won't get us there. Now, that's actually taken from a book title that's called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. It's about how successful people often, after they've really achieved some significant success, they kind of plateau out. They get stalled and stuck. They just stay there. And the book explains why. And there was a really interesting insight that I read when reading that book. It said that there are some practices and strategies and priorities that serve us very well at a certain stage in our work, but then we reach a point where those strategies and practices and priorities don't take us. They can't take us to the next place where we need to go, but they work so far, and they're really familiar, so we just keep doing them over and over and over, and we get kind of stuck. Another way to say this is that sometimes we're in a rut so deep we think it's a groove. To overcome this tendency, successful people have to keep checking in if what they're doing is able to take us where we want to go, or if we're just totally stuck and busy with our tried and true strategies and we're missing other leverage points. So in that context, I want to talk about diversion. Focusing on increasing diversion rates has allowed cities in California to reach heroic levels of diversion. In raising these diversion rates, you've busted myths, you've proved the impossible, you gave zero waste credibility, and you silenced naysayers. You have achieved unprecedented success. Here, I can say, you have caused a paradigm shift in our relationship to waste. But now, with the increasing plasticization of packaging and the explosion of complex, short-life products, Will increasing diversion take us where we want to go, to zero waste? My sense is that those of you who are starting to ask this question and starting to look upstream are on the right track. To take zero waste to the next level, we need to change the context in which we do our work. Not just get better and better and better at doing what we're doing, but we need to look at the broader system in places where we can make small changes that open up the doors to bigger changes. We need to change the rules, adopt product bans, and restrict materials that cannot be safely recycled or composted. We need to strategically, thoughtfully, carefully support EPR in a way that both respects